Everyone, thanks for joining in. Appreciate you spending some time as we're going to kind of go over a paper that we have in the works. Could be published maybe right before this comes out, maybe a little bit after, maybe if we're lucky, same day. But it's a project called Switching Schools, Examining the Networks, Antecedents, and On-Court Outcomes of NCAA Men's B-Ball Transfers. I'm going to be the only voice you're going to hear for this presentation, but I want to give a shout out to my co-authors, David Pfeiffer, who's at Texas Tech University, and Akira Asada, also at Texas Tech, both former colleagues of mine down in Red Raider Nation. But they ended up doing quite a bit on the methodology for doing our analysis, especially Dr. Asada did social network analysis, Dr. Pfeiffer did the rest. And ultimately, this is really Dr. Pfeiffer's baby. I'm just shepherding this along as a second author on this paper, but I'm going to kind of walk through us on this. If you have questions about that, I'm more than willing if you want to reach out to me and I can connect you with both of them, especially with any methodology questions. But jumping in, I am going to share my screen so we can kind of go over the presentation. Perfect. Hopefully that's the right screen. But as you can kind of see, kind of diving into this introduction stuff, there's been a lot of changes in the last 10, 15 years with NCAA transfer rules. Specifically, athletes are getting more latitude to transfer, whether that's transferring from Division I to Division I school, but also transferring to another school in the same conference. There's also greater latitude that's provided for grad students. So one big caveat is, I couldn't even tell you now, running the numbers, I think 15-ish years ago, grad transfers were allowed to transfer once without having to sit out. So if you finish your undergrad degree, the NCAA decided to reward you with a carrot of allowing you to transfer anywhere you want and play immediately. Then that kind of started to grow into less and less restrictions on athletes transferring from D1 to D1. And it turned into, as long as a school didn't object, you potentially could transfer right away as long as it wasn't in conference. And then conferences started having restrictions no matter what, that if you wanted to transfer in conference, you had to sit out a year. Some of them even had it where you had to go a year without any athletic aid. So it turned into a lot of athletes would end up leading their conference. Now that could mean that they transferred to junior college and came back up to 4-year. There was different options depending on your year of eligibility. Also, rules differ from sport to sport. So if you're a women's volleyball player, you can transfer immediately. There is no sit out period. But if you are a basketball athlete, you have to sit out. There was a transfer sitting out. This is going through massive change now, to the point where now you don't have to get permission from your school to transfer. All you have to do is notify them. And lo and behold, we see the great phrase of transfer portal, that there's this online system that's accessible by NCAA institutions, at least people that have some type of access within those organizations, where they can look at all the athletes that have requested to transfer. And you're able to get contact information and see that they've been approved and whether they're in good standing and all that. And it's leading to an increase in transfers. NCAA has data on this and also kind of dictates depending on what sport you're looking at as well. The other weird thing is we're seeing coaches that speak out against it. I've seen some coaches recently talk about how they think people are quitting if they go in the transfer portal, and they're willing to push through and work really hard and get success. They're being beat out at the position and then therefore quitting. But those same coaches are often embracing if a transfer comes in they think can help their roster. So a lot of double talk on that. But I think it's just raised good questions about how important are transfers to team success. I think we're seeing this bevy of changes, but we aren't really talking about how much those changes are helpful. So you can see little research on that, but we kind of break down. We have, our purpose here is we're examining patterns of movement in the transfer market within NCAA Division I men's basketball, and whether those transfers also lead to increases in an opportunity and performance on the court. And that's going to work both ways. We're going to see if teams that bring in transfers end up getting benefits for them. Is it induce or is it beneficial for team performance? But then Also, is it beneficial for individual performance? If you're transferring from Texas Tech to Cincinnati, we'll use those as an example, and you get more playing time and you get better chances to provide your own individual performance, and it's showing that you're more likely to improve team performance, it seems like a win-win for everybody. But we're going to compare those transfer players to freshman players, because if you're a coach and deciding to recruit, you have a choice. You can bring in an incoming first-year player that you're recruiting right out of high school, or you can bring in a community college 2-year player, or you can bring in a transfer from another 4-year school. And that's the part that we're going to look specifically at. Essentially looking at as you have a variation across 2 different areas that can supply talent within your sport. So giving just a quick review of literature, I often try to mention this in presentations, that there's a lot more literature at hand than potentially we have time to talk about here. Hopefully in the near future, we should have our paper out and you can kind of see the totality of all the materials that we have together. But there is research out there on transfer athletes, but most of it's focused on the athlete experience from outside potentially athletics, but also including a little bit. And we kind of put this in 3 major buckets. We have transfer athletes having to integrate to a new campus, a new experience, and what that's like. As you can imagine, it can be pretty shocking. And for me, I can tell you, as a person that was a community college athlete to 4-year, there is quite a bit of difference there. We also have some great work from Dr. Cooper, Dr. Hawkins, and Dr. Harper on Black athlete transfer experiences as well. Some of those talk about transferring from an HBCU or transferring into a primarily white institution as well. Some great work there. And then also what is considered, I guess, the traditional transfer experience, at least what it used to be the traditional of going from a 2-year institution, a community college, to a 4-year institution and trying to continue your experiences that way. Now, to kind of talk a little bit about why it's important from an athletic achievement standpoint is if a school has a successful team or even a potential star, that could increase applications of the school. You can be dubious on this depending on the quality of the applications, but at worst, you're going to get a greater pool of students you want to look through. You also are going to get an increase in alumni donations, which in another presentation I'm making here at CSRI this year talks about the benefit and importance of bringing in more donors. But we think this is an important examination to make because transfer policies are going through quite a bit of change. And it used to be that getting a transfer athlete was challenging and really restrictive. Even if you found a transfer athlete that you thought was a good fit for you and the athlete thought was a good fit for them, there at least would have to be a 1-year waiting period where they'd have to sit and practice only and then be able to play. And if they get hurt the next year, they already burned potentially their redshirt year and are now going to lose a full year of eligibility. So there was all kinds of issues there. A lot of those roadblocks have been taken down. So it's showing that this supply of talent is becoming more accessible and potentially more beneficial, as we're hoping to see. There's also evidence of better athlete performance based on age. If you have a football team full of 18-year-olds against a football team full of 21-year-olds, keeping everything the same, you're going to be more successful with the older players, especially within college. Experience matters, especially as Dr. Pfeiffer talked about in our paper. Experience especially matters if you have postseason success or postseason appearance as well. But this also highlights what we think are concerns about national letter of intent and the restrictions it puts on them. So going into that, I want to look at non-compete clauses. So there's been discussions about how there is similar characteristics between the national letter of intent and non-compete clauses. And non-compete clauses are often common in the technology industry, and they specify a period of time in which a former employee is not hireable by competing firms. Now, often this is due to institutional knowledge. So if you are working for a chip company and you have specific knowledge on how those chips are made and how they compete against other chips in the industry, they wouldn't want you necessarily to jump over to, I'm really getting myself into trouble here, but IBM, let's hope IBM makes chips, because then you potentially are bringing some institutional knowledge that would give them a benefit, an undue benefit within the business. And so that's been kind of some of the thought of national letter of intent is you have this undue knowledge, but does that really apply to college athletes? Teams change their plans all the time, but then also everyone scouts, they see what's going on, especially within basketball. It's a little bit harder to hide some of the stuff that's going on there. And any of the cloak and dagger offensively is really going to be stuff that changes year to year. So you wouldn't really have an athlete that has a ton of institutional knowledge from a game plan perspective. And if you're talking about outside of basketball, there's a lot more cloak and dagger potentially on playing style, but some sports are more free flowing. There isn't as much strategy involved in the coaches. And when you have something like football, there's all kinds of secretive decisions and strategies employed to make sure play calls get put in without the team knowing. Same for volleyball, potentially making a decision where you want to attack offensively. But I don't really think this applies to college athletes. I think you can make an argument that would poke a lot of holes in that. And there's been some people worried about transfers hurting competitive balance. I think that's a bunch of baloney. Competitive balance already stinks in college athletics. If you let people transfer more often, so if Alabama football gets a ton of the top players, some of those players won't play. If they want to transfer and get more playing time, I think that's a better dispersion of that talent, and you're going to see a greater distribution of that talent is probably a better way of saying that. And the competitive balance is going to be improved. So if anything, I think allowing more transfers can only help the competitive balance across college athletics. Now, diving into the methods, I want to be careful here because I don't want to do too much on this, because this is really going to be more of Dr. Piper and Dr. Asada's area. But to kind of give you some background, we were able to get connected with the NCAA, and they were able to provide us a comprehensive list of transfers of NCAA men's basketball players from 2012 to 13 to 2016 to 17. We also added on that list and provided them a more what we thought was a comprehensive list of transfers. But we ended up getting a decent window where we're able to see transfers and also see their career somewhat play out, so we could collect as accurate data as possible. And it ended up kind of we ended up narrowing that list and ended up finalizing it at 1,160 athletes who had transferred specifically from D1 to D1 and played at least 1 minute. We thought this is important because comparing stats from D1 to D2 can be really, or D3 can be really problematic. A player that could score 10 points a game at D1 could be a prolific scorer in D3. So that was a problem. Also, you could have athletes that transfer never played. That kind of would really screw with our data. So we wanted to make sure they had played at least 1 minute so we could make comparisons across the analysis that we wanted to do. We got all the data after we got the names from sportsreference.com, their college basketball website. If you haven't checked that out, I would recommend it. It's awesome. And we also specifically want to compare these people to first-year athletes, because that's really your two buckets. You may have grad transfers, but and that's important too, but we were looking specifically at transfers within their first initial 5-year eligibility, which I guess could include grad transfers as well. But we're comparing the first-year college athletes to see these year two supply pipelines and which one would be a better fit for you. Now, this goes against or worrying about any benefits related to first-year college athletes of having a much longer period of time where you have control, I guess, but with transfers increasing, there is no control. You could bring in a transfer and a first-year college athlete, and they both could end up leaving the next year. But we were specifically looking at data within players, total games up here, total minutes played, minutes per game, usage percentage, overall win shares, and win shares per 40 minutes. And then also Dr. Asada did some social network analysis that we're going to kind of go over as well. Now I'm going to kind of zoom in. Here's some of the details we use for calculating usage percentage and win shares. I'm not going to go over this because you don't want to hear me go through all the details, but this is excerpts from our manuscript that we have that's still in review right now. If you have any complaints about this, I will more than gladly give you Dr. Piper's email. But moving on to the results, and then we're going to get to discussion. So with our transfer network analysis, we wanted to see, was there any specific permanent connections between programs? Like, for example, did we see a number of players transfer from Georgetown to Memphis for whatever reason? We found out that there wasn't really any identifiable patterns in the network. And there really was kind of a low density, low reciprocity. So there wasn't any weak relationships between there. That could be that I started to notice that when coaches move from job to job, they're moving significantly up, or they get fired and moving significantly down. One way or the other, the coach might not be interested in bringing some of their players from the old institution because they may not be as competitive at the new one. Maybe they bring in maybe their top player. And then there's also kind of an agreement within the buyout potentially what restrictions are put in place there of the coach or recruit any of the new athletes. But then other ways, if a coach is at North Carolina State and they end up getting fired and taking a job as Central Missouri, University of Central Missouri, you might not have a lot of athletes that are interested in making that. So that's where sometimes you can kind of see some weak patterns within that. But we did find that they're more likely to transfer in state. So if you have a player that goes to University of Illinois, if something doesn't work out, maybe they end up going to DePaul, Illinois State, Northern Illinois, maybe further down to University of Illinois Springfield, stuff like that. Now, for on-court performance-related benefits, we noticed and we suggest D1 athletes actually improve both their own prospects and the prospects of their team. So this is a great finding for us. We find out that athletes end up getting benefited by transferring, and the team gets benefited by bringing in transfers. This, to us, is saying strongly that focusing on bringing in transfer athletes might actually be a beneficial recruiting strategy for programs within men's basketball compared to doing freshmen or first-year athletes. We also noticed that, given the opportunity to play for a new coach, college athletes were able to take advantage of the opportunity and contribute more wins. So that's specifically looking at that win share piece. Now, going into discussion, this kind of shows that, to me, the social network analysis, the lack of significance means athletes are more likely to choose based on their circumstances instead of program connections. An athlete might have gone to that school from far away home. They might decide to go back home, but the next athlete isn't from that same area in the country or maybe even internationally, and so they decide to go somewhere else. Other athlete might decide playing time is more important, or maybe there is a coach that they got recruited by when they were in high school that they really had a great connection to. So that weakness is kind of going to telling us that there's more based on circumstances for the athletes, which are a little bit more lacking in tangible association for us. Now, we think the results speak to benefits of having a loosened transfer market and how it can really help college athletes and also the programs. Obviously, someone's going to be a lose-lose. It hurts when your team has a first-year athlete and they do really well and decide to transfer. Obviously, that stinks. Or maybe you bring in a strong, like a really talented first-year player and they just don't end up developing well and they transfer somewhere else and then they develop. And that can really hurt, I guess, for your fandom perspective. But it shows that it's actually really beneficial. It's beneficial for the athlete to find a new opportunity. It's beneficial for the team. And that this kind of change of scenery can help revitalize their career for a lot of reasons. It could be just a fresh start. It could be closer to home or closer to family or more playing time. There's a lot of different factors there that could be a great future recommendation or study to go into that. But that's kind of the big piece takeaway for us. But that is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, you can shoot me an email. It's matt.hummel@uc.edu, or you can contact me and find me on Twitter. I think I'm at Matt _Hummel. And then you can ask any questions there. But thanks for joining and hope to hear from you soon.